Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Whoa, a hot mic. My name is Anthony Cimolino. I'm the artistic director of the Stratford Festival, and today is a very important day. Today, we put the Macbeths on trial. After hundreds of years of running recklessly at liberty on the pages and stages of the world, there will be an appeal. There will be an appeal of a previous verdict that found the Macbeths not guilty. No. Whoa, it's a deeply divided house. Not guilty for reasons of being not criminally responsible due to insanity driven by politics. Now, this is a tough question to settle, but fortunately, we have an astounding amount of legal talent on our hands today. The case will be heard by none other than our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Beverley McLachlin. This play, for some reason, is very, very popular with politicians. I'm also the director of the production of Macbeth. And it was, thank you, it was Lincoln's favorite play. He quoted from it just days before he died. But there's not a lot said in the play about the reasons why a person might enter into politics. There's a lot about taking power, there's a lot of hunger for power, but the reasons why a person might want to serve their fellow man, make the world a little bit better, seems to be absent, except towards the end of the play, Prince Malcolm talks about the king becoming graces. The king becoming graces, those qualities that any leader should have when they take office. And I want to just read them to you. So, given that it's an election year in the United States, to think about the quality of leadership in Canada, around the world, and right now as we head up to November. Here are the king becoming graces: justice, verity, temperance. Wait for it. Stableness. Bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, and fortitude. I ask you if you see that around the world in our leaders, or whether the behaviors that we're seeing might make a person act just like the Macbeths did. So, to place you in the point of time, there has been a case brought forward, and we have an appeal that's being heard. The Crown will come forward. We're going to have a star witness in Bob Rae speaking about politicians. And I'll now ask our Executive Director, Anita Gaffney, to come forward and introduce the players.
Good morning. Wow, what a great house. Today's appeal will be argued by two of Canada's most illustrious advocates. Please welcome Donald Bain, representing the Crown, and Marlis Edwards, representing the accused, and of course, the couple at the center of this appeal, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The Supreme Court of Stratford has been honored to have such depth of wisdom in the justices who have ruled in these proceedings over the last 3 years, and this year is no exception. Please rise for the entrance of our judges, the Right Honourable Beverley McLachlin, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, the Honourable Justice Andromache Karakatsanis from the Supreme Court of Canada, the Honourable Justice Russell Brown from the Supreme Court of Canada. You will now witness the examination in chief from the original trial of the Macbeths conducted by the counsel for the accused, Marlis Edward, of Dr. Bob Ray, providing his expert opinion on the mental state of the accused. This will be followed by the cross-examination of Dr. Ray by the Crown Counsel, Donald Bain.
Thank you. We proceed to hear the next witness for the defense. I wish to file an expert report that I ought to have done when Dr. Sigmund Freud testified. I inadvertently failed to do that. I apologize. But my learned friend, the Crown Prosecutor, does not object to me doing this. So I have copies for the court. Thank you very much. And would ask that it be marked as Exhibit 1 in these proceedings. And Mr. Bain, do you need a copy?
I have it.
Thank you. In any event, I might, in fairness, add that Mr. Bain consents to this being filed because, of course, when you read the report, you will see that Dr. Freud believed that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were dead. So he proceeded to just review the entire collateral record, of course relying on the historian, William Shakespeare, to prepare the report, give his diagnosis that they suffered from a brief psychotic disorder, rendering them suffering from a disease of the mind. Well, the difficulty, of course, is you may all be aware that Mr. Bain will argue you should give this report no weight at all, because in fact, it is essential to actually interview someone if you're going to assess them. Indeed, in some places, it's professional misconduct to not. But you have the report. My friend does not object to it being before you, and I will argue that it is of relevance and it can assist you. Now, let me turn to call my witness. Dr. Ray, the Honorable Dr. Ray, will you come forward? Now, Dr. Ray, if I might, I am a little puzzled by something. I have reviewed your curriculum vitae.
Only one thing, Councillor?
Only one thing. I have reviewed your curriculum vitae very carefully, and I want you to tell me how to address you. I see that you are the Honorable Doctor. And in order to make things a little simpler, would you give me the indulgence of just referring to you as the Honorable Dr. Ray?
Everyone else calls me Bob. I don't know why. That's fine. Absolutely.
Well, I will do the Honorable Dr. Ray,
Thank
sir.
you.
So I want to turn to your background and credentials. You graduated from Oxford in 1973,
That's correct.
and you then attended law school at the University of Toronto and graduated from the Toronto Law School in 1977.
Yes, I did.
I understand you didn't give a second to the practice of law, but went directly into your real work, which was to walk the corridors of power.
Yes, I was first elected in 1978.
And you've been elected 11 times to the House of Commons and to the Ontario Legislature between 78 and 2013. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. I'm what is referred to as a repeat offender.
And then, in the year 1990 to 1995, you served as Ontario's 21st Premier. Is that correct?
Yeah, guilty as charged. Yeah.
And in 2011, you became the interim leader of the Federal Liberal Party,
Yes.
as well as the Foreign Affairs
The
critic.
pattern continued. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, you'll agree that in those years, you were able to watch those around you begin strategies to seek and have power.
Oh, absolutely, including myself.
Yes, and we'll come to the fact that your observations go from you as an individual to the people you worked with.
It's impossible for me to distinguish between myself and other people.
Well, when it comes to what? The effects of the...
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
Just carry on.
All right, but you have talked to, seen, and observed people who seek power, including yourself.
Absolutely.
And given your lengthy experience, the Honorable Dr. Ray, have you had a chance to study persons in particular whose political ambition was nakedly obvious to all?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Thank you. So in general, from your personal experience, what are the effects you have observed in those persons who lust for power?
It's like a drug. It takes hold of you, and it never lets you go. It starts modestly, thinking that you can just run for city council and nothing else will happen. But very quickly, the effect takes over. And it never completely leaves you.
Does it affect
Even
them?
now, it never completely leaves you.
And when you say it never leaves you,
One,
is the
one,
effect,
never leaves one.
is
One.
the effect continuing on the mind
Yes.
and the body?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. I need, because we have a little bit of time here, I need to actually turn to your examination of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth.
Yes,
You have done a report,
I have. I have it
and
here.
I believe the court is in possession of it, so I'd ask that it be marked as Exhibit 2.
Always two, eh? Not one?
Well, I'm sorry, but Exhibit 1 happened to be Dr. Freud.
I've never heard of him. Where did he run?
I believe he hails from Vienna. But he is the
Vienna
father
Center
of
or
psych...
Vienna West or what? Which one?
Let me move on if I could. I understand that unlike Dr. Freud, you had the opportunity to interview Macbeth and Lady Macbeth with the benefit of telehealth.
That's
so
correct.
it's kind of a
That's
so
correct.
it's kind of a Skype conversation.
It was a Skype-like conversation.
Yeah. And can you tell us how long was the interview?
Well, I interviewed them both together, and then I interviewed them separately.
Ah, so you conducted 2 interviews.
No, 3.
Sorry, 3. All right.
Might have been 4. I think it was 3.
All right. And I just want to get an overview, if I could. First of all, when you spoke to them individually or together, how did they appear to you?
Well, they were pretty haggard. They were in a place that was obviously very, very hot. They were sweating profusely. There was a lot of fire and smoke in the room, and there was a lot of moaning and crying and screaming. So it was quite often quite hard to understand what they were saying, but I could get the gist of what they were all about.
And did that occur in both or all the interviews you had with them?
Every single one of them, yeah.
And if you'll help me, did that interfere with the interviews?
Oh no, I've conducted interviews and conversations in far worse circumstances.
And can you tell us whether you believe they survived the fires, the moans, the screams, and the smoke? Do you know whether they continue to be?
Well, they're still there. They'll be there for quite a long time. I think it's called eternity.
Okay, so let's then turn. You've also had access to a wonderful collateral record, in particular from the historian William Shakespeare.
Yeah, I've seen the play several times since I was a high school student. So saw the performance last night. I've seen it twice before that this year. It's great opportunity. So I'm what you'd call an expert.
And
I'm an expert
can you
witness.
give to us your conclusions with respect to both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth?
I think the technical term is they were bananas. They were seized by a manic lust for power. And I say they together because they were captured, the two of them together, by this incredible urge for power and for domination. They imagined things, they dreamt things, they made stuff up.
Now, let me just
Sort of
stop
like
you.
the debate the other night. I don't know if any of you saw it.
Let me just go back to this. It's imagining of things. and
Sorry, I have a
making
hard
things-
time keeping a train of thought. It seems
right.
to be an
Yeah,
occupation.
no, we understand, sir. Would you like a glass of water?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't drink water.
So let's go back to this. You say they had imaginings and illusions and hallucinations, and you describe them. Did you get the impression that they believed them all?
Oh, I think they took them seriously. I think they were captured by them. And I think, for example, all of the witches, right?
Yes?
Today, I think we call them pollsters. But they actually they believed what they told them. They believed that this was somehow part of destiny. People believe that they're called. That they believed that this was part of their whole way of being in the world. So yeah, they believed all this stuff. They believed that this was all quite real to them.
And did you get the sense from them in your interview, and did you come to the opinion that not only did they believe them, not only did it define their destiny, but they were obliged to act in accordance with what those hallucinations and delusions told them?
Well, they took it pretty far. I mean, there has to be some explanation as to all those dead bodies on the stage there were last night. They slaughtered quite a few, although we're only here to talk about the king. But there were a number of others that,
Yes, we'll deal
as
with
we
those
might
later.
say, fell by the wayside. There was quite a few of them.
Now, one last question before I let Mr. Bain cross-examine you. You've read the report of Dr. Freud, correct?
Of course.
And he describes them as suffering from a brief psychotic episode, which rendered them unable to appreciate their acts were morally wrong. I want to ask you directly, do you agree with his conclusions?
I do. Let me just explain why, because
Yes.
I get a sense that Dr. Bain may ask me some questions about this.
He's just Mr. Bain.
Whatever. It's just, doesn't bother me, whatever the title is. They were seized by this disorder, and it drove them to the point of a frenzy. And during the frenzy, they were just going at it, being driven and taken over by this strange power. And that, I think, has to explain what happened. If they weren't completely crazed, how else could they have done what they did?
Tell me, did you interview them and assess whether they had any moral compass left?
Well, it was pretty hard to tell. I mean, she kept talking about Spot, damn Spot. I didn't know if she was talking about a dog or if she was talking about a Tide commercial. I couldn't really tell what it was all about. He kept saying, was that a dagger behind you? And I said, there's no dagger in front of me. And I checked with my computer. There were no daggers or knives on the screen. They were pretty troubled couple, I would say.
Well, Dr. Ray, thank you for your attendance here today.
Not at
Those are
all.
all my questions. I'm sure.
Do I get
Mis-
my expenses for this? I'm just wondering.
Of course. Send me the bill. Mr. Bain will have a few questions.
Thank you.
Let me say, by way of introduction, members of the court, that I indeed did not object to the report of Dr. Freud, and I do, as well, suggest it merits no weight whatsoever. It's 1607. The man hasn't been born yet. No wonder Dr. Ray has not heard of him. And with that preface, good morning, good Dr. Ray.
Good morning, Mr. Bain.
Yes, Mr. Bain. Donald Bain. Does that name ring a bell?
Actually, it doesn't, but that's okay.
Well, you might rest assured that despite the fact that the Macbeths, on whose behalf you offer your opinion, savagely, cruelly, viciously murdered the father of my long-lost relative and namesake, nevertheless, there'll be nothing of a personal nature in my question. Are we good to
Well,
go?
not everyone would believe your counsel, but I do.
And we both understand from the outset, sir, that what you offer here is sheer opinion, not fact, right? It's an opinion you offer.
I'd say it's a combination of a modest amount of fact and a fair amount of opinion.
Whereas the good reporter, Shakespeare, provided an accurate record of the actual statements and conduct of the two accused, correct?
Yes.
So, if I understand, and our jury members can understand, the nature of this opinion, and I'm quoting now from your excellent report,
Thank you.
the bitch goddess, political ambition made them crazy, drove them nuts, and fried their brains, to put it technically.
That's true. Those are the words that I used. I was.
And
was
you added a tagline of brief psychotic disorder.
I was choosing to express the brief psychotic disorder, which is a technical term, in language that the judges could understand.
And wisely done, too.
Yeah.
And through this bitch goddess, they lost all sense, you say, in your opinion, or awareness of the full dimensions of their acts. That's what you say in your report.
That's correct.
And you sum it up at the end saying, in effect, you identified a Canadian content to this conduct because of the double-double. And
That's good. But
You
Counselor,
suggest-
you've just done something unforgivable. You've stolen my line.
And you suggested that really describing what happened here is they rolled up the rim, jumped into the cauldron, and lost it all.
That's right.
Right,
I said
okay.
this is the only play of Shakespeare's that I'm aware that starts out with a very clear reference to Canada.
Yes. Now,
Double, double.
we will roll up the rim. You weren't, by the way, fueled on caffeine and hanging out at Timmy's when you wrote this report, were you?
I might have had a cup or two.
So we hope in this all too brief cross-examination, good doctor, to take a hard, critical second cup look at roll up the rim. Or to put it a different way, since you yourself raise in your report the issue of stars, maybe shine the full light of the Starbucks on this roll up the rim. Okay, are we good with that?
Well, you're going as low as you can go, so keep going.
Let's examine the qualifications you offer for the roll up the rim. You say you've had some 50-year career as a, and I'm quoting you, political rising star.
I said I've been a rising star for over 5 decades.
You're very well leavened.
Yeah. You may not have noticed my lapel. If I could just take a moment, just because many people have noticed the number of badges on my lapel. I'm quite proud of them. This is the Order of Canada. This is the Order of Ontario. This is the Order of Santa Mariana Third Class, which I got from the government of Estonia. And this is the Order of Dixon. Dixon Hall is a settlement house in my riding. So I don't know how many, I look like a Latin American general up here, but you can't tell me that I'm not qualified. I mean, I've got the buttons to prove it.
And in that distinguished 50-year rising political career, I take it, sir, you have formed and held opinions throughout that career. But I suggest further, sir, that those opinions were not always consistent because they proved to be mistaken. For example, as in to be or not to be, liberal or NDP. I mean, Dr. Ray, it's almost a quarter century as NDP leader.
Is this a speech or a question? I'm just trying to...
And then to quote certain witches, fair became foul and foul became fair. And you flew away through the fog and filthy air of the NDP to join the fairer ground of the Liberals. Is that correct?
Well, I think what you're assuming is that the journey is over.
At least as far as we've traced it so far. And you'll agree that's a profound change of opinion.
Well, consistency is, as it's been said, the hobgoblin of small minds.
Yes. Or we could examine further into your political career, such as double, toil and trouble. Those Ray days burst my government's bubble.
Well, better a Ray day than a Harper lifetime.
And the other qualification, although my friend was at pains to mention your many honorary degrees, the one that you've cited in addition to your 50 years of rising is that you have an advanced certificate from the Community College in Heidelberg in emotional intelligence, correct?
That's what I say, yes.
That's what you say. And that is, sir, you know the difference between a university and a community college, of course.
Yes, I've received degrees from both.
Yes. And this emotional intelligence certificate is not a degree.
Well, many people have been to Heidelberg, but I'm the only one who has the scars to show it.
And I checked. There is no, Heidelberg Community College in Germany. So surely you mean the one, when I checked, in Heidelberg, Mississippi.
I was actually, I made it up.
Perfect.
Do I have to be consistent? I mean, it's a CV. Does it all have to be right? I mean, is
No,
it...
no. That's what the second cut look is all about.
Yeah.
Would you agree, good doctor, that emotional intelligence is not psychiatry?
Well, I've met a lot of psychiatrists who have zero emotional intelligence. So, yeah, I mean, and two of them have been my therapists. So they didn't understand what I was going through, and they were no help whatsoever.
Let's take a quick look at the opinion itself.
Yeah, please.
Yes. Okay, so you say this was a brief psychotic episode, correct?
Yes.
Can I travel with you according to Mr. Shakespeare's chronology through the concept of brief? First of all, the accused, and particularly Macbeth himself, started to ruminate on murder after meeting three weird sisters, recognized that he need not commit murder in order to attain the crown. And then he went on to meet his erstwhile spouse, and they together planned and deliberated to murder Duncan, and that was over the course of some days before Duncan came to the castle after momentous battles, right?
The whole play lasted about 2.5 hours.
Well, you do understand the
What are you talking
concept
about?
of artistic license.
Well, also legal license, I guess. I mean, you're saying this lasted for 3.5 days. I was only here for about 2.5 hours last night. I know what you're talking
And
about.
then-
It all happened very quickly.
And then after some days of planning, in which Lady Macbeth adverted to the fact that she would drug the king's guards, they would frame the king's guards for the murder that Macbeth himself called a horrid deed. And then the next night, they purported to put into action their plan and executed it just as planned. And then the next morning, feigned surprise at the death of the king they knew they had murdered. And they went further.
Are your
Later-
questions always this long? I'm just out of curiosity. I mean, is this like...
I'm just coming to the concept of brief,
I'm
sir.
just wondering. Well,
Your word.
well, you're having some trouble. If the questions are brief, it's longer than the psychotic episodes.
Well, that's my point, you see.
Okay, at least you have one.
And
Okay.
then, not only did Macbeth feign surprise, he took the option the next morning, after carrying out the plan, to execute the two innocent guards. And then, some weeks later, after he'd been invested as king, so a considerable passage of time, he started to put the blame on Donalbain and on Malcolm, saying the cruel parricide that they had committed, knowing full well he had done it, and then ends up, later still, executing a contract killing of his friend Banquo, and much further still, attacks the good and virtuous Macduffy. Right? We're talking here, sir, a span of days, weeks, and months. Is that brief?
Well, what I saw was briefer than your question. So I think the thing that we need to appreciate is that there was a kind of, I think the technical term is folie à deux between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. It gets whipped up very early on in the play, and it's clear that the two of them are playing off against each other to the point where there's no separate personality between the two. In fact, it's very interesting to me that Lady Macbeth doesn't have her own name. Her real Scottish name was Agnes MacHeather. And she was never able to express her own name. She simply became subsumed totally in the person. They were one personality, Macbeth. Just one big thing. It was like this folie à deux. It's different from the folie bergère. That's a different folly. That's a shepherd's dance that takes place in France somewhere. But this is a separate thing. This folie à deux, the two of them together, were just completely as one. And I think it's a sad reflection that I think if Lady Macbeth had had her own name and had been able to keep her own name, she might have gotten out of this mess, you know? I feel that.
So it's sort of a double-double.
Double-double. Toil and trouble.
And finally, sir,
Okay.
whether they lost awareness of what they were doing, let's examine Shakespeare's record. Lady Macbeth, while plotting and taunting her husband to be a man and commit murder, says and identifies the fact that the murder plan, the planned and deliberate murder plan, is the means by which they will wrongly win the crown. That's a recognition that what they're doing is wrong, correct?
Well, I mean, how do you rightly win a crown? I mean, how do you think any of the people who are now crowned, monarchs, I mean, how do you think their families got there, you know? In an election or something? What are you talking about? They killed each other. They destroyed each other, and then they put a crown on their head, and they put some ermine robes on, no offense, Justices, and it suddenly all becomes respectable, you know?
I'm not trying them. This court is not trying them.
Well, you're trying a lot of people.
Well, one in particular. And she further goes on to say these things about the crime they plan and commit. It's an act of direst cruelty. It's a fell purpose. We're following the murdering ministers. Our acts are the dimmest smoke of hell. We will fake innocence, but be the serpent. We will show no remorse. We will wash our hands of the filthy witness of the blood. And for his part, Macbeth rightly identifies, does he not, the planned and deliberate murder of the king as an assassination that we commit, a treason. And he notes there is judgment here, moral judgment by the realm, and even-handed justice, legal ramification. For this, what he says, is a horrid deed, this deed of treason we commit. Do those words and conduct not betray that they had full, even acute awareness and appreciation that they were killing a human being and that it was legally and morally wrong?
I think that was a good speech, by the way.
It's actually
No,
a
I was
question.
listening. I mean, I thought it was just, I mean, it was not as good as last night, but it was good. To me, the problem with your theory is that it ignores the simple fact that for a period of time, these people were clearly caught up in a frenzy. And it's that frenzy that drove them to kill the king. And the question then is, well, what about afterwards? What about the wringing of the hands and all of the expressions of remorse and the guilt and the sleeplessness and other things with which some of us are occasionally familiar? I don't think that takes away at all for a moment that this was a brief psychotic disorder and not a permanent condition. So the question you have to answer is,
I don't have to answer any
well,
questions.
you know, you're going to be up in a minute, and you're going to have to do your job. But anyway, I just want to say that you've grilled me and thrown my record on the floor and stomped on me, and I just want you to know there are no hard feelings. In fact, I could suggest, if you don't mind, perhaps we could just take a picture together. Thank you. I think I'm supposed to step down now.
Yes. Well, my duty is to tell you that after hearing that wonderful examination and cross-examination, the Macbeths were acquitted. And we now have an appeal brought by the Crown from that acquittal. And we will be now, as this court is constituted, hearing that appeal.
May it please the court. The first proposition on which I will spend very little time is the qualifications of the good Dr. Ray, because they deserve so little. He was not and is not a properly qualified expert in psychotic disorders, notwithstanding his career as a 50-year rising star, and the gatekeeper function of the court to guard against inherently unreliable or dangerous evidence commends itself to the members of the court. The key issue, however, in this appeal is not disease of the mind or abnormal state or psychotic disorder or somnambulism, sleepwalking, or alleged hallucinations of a dagger or a ghost. It's not about whether witches are real or imaginary. The key issue is whether at the critical time of planning and deliberating to kill another human being, and at the time of executing that planned and deliberate plan, the perpetrators were incapable, through this roll-up-the-rim opinion, of appreciating the nature and quality of their acts and that they were criminally and morally wrong. The evidence is significant to the point of being overwhelming that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, at the critical times of their careful conspiratorial planning of the murder of King Duncan and the carrying out exactly according to plan of that murder, and then in the cunning cover-up, because post-defense conduct is highly revealing. In the cunning cover-up, the framing of others, contract killings to cover up the crime, to eliminate potential witnesses, to seal the framing of the guards, and then to remove the threats of noble people. The evidence is so overwhelming that they not only fully, they acutely appreciated the nature and quality of their acts and that they were wrong.
What is the source of this evidence?
I'm coming right now to that, my lady.
Thank
Macbeth debated with himself. I think you're referring, are you, to the fact that some of the statements emanate from the spouse of Macbeth?
That may be the case.
She too, however, is charged. She's an
Yes.
accused, so her statements are admissible.
Under the law of the time.
Yes. Well, it's, as hath spake Trudeau the Younger, it's 1607. Macbeth has described, in debating with himself whether to murder Duncan, that it is a black and deep desire, morally wrong. He then went on to agree with his good lady that the murder of Duncan was the nearest way, that is the easiest, the most sure way of wresting this crown, but that they both agreed it was to wrongly win the crown, morally wrong. A rational choice was made with full appreciation that they were conspiring to kill a human being and that such an act was wrong. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth identified the proposed murder of Duncan during their pre-murder conspiratorial discussions as an act of direst cruelty, in which they would act outwardly as innocent flowers, while in fact they would act as serpents. This kind of cunning deception and conniving to be deceptive is illustrative of the full awareness of what they were doing and sought to cover up. In debating and discussing the proposed killing of the king, they described it accurately as an assassination. And Macbeth himself identified there is a consequence for this if we are discovered. He referred to there is judgment, moral condemnation in the realm. There is even-handed justice if we are discovered, legal responsibility. He even went so far as to identify that as Duncan's host and loyal subject, he should be guarding the king, not murdering him himself. He identified what he intended to do as a horrid deed, full appreciation of what he was doing. Lady Macbeth successfully urged him on to murder and had a plan to avoid detection. She would drug the king's guards. She would leave the king exposed to Macbeth's stab wounds. And then they would cast the blame for murder on the drugged and innocent guards. Macbeth was convinced, but not by witches, rather by Lady Macbeth, that they could get away with their crime. He feared being discovered. She convinced him they wouldn't be if they did it according to her plan. And such a cunning plan to avoid murder, to commit murder, to avoid detection and cast blame on innocents argues overwhelmingly against a lack of capacity to appreciate what they were doing or that it was legally and morally wrong. Well, Macbeth continues, even after the admonition of his wife, to wrestle with his conscience. Nevertheless, he decided to carry on and commit the bloody business of withered murder. For her part, Lady Macbeth also did some rumination about what they were about to do, especially as Macbeth was off on his assigned mission. She feared that the guards might awaken, and that to attempt murder and not succeed, she fully appreciated, would ruin herself and Macbeth. She said, "Alack, I am afraid they've awaked, and 'tis not done. The attempt and not the deed confounds us." But the guards did not awaken. The murderous plan is executed as jointly designed.
Mr. Bain, excuse me for interrupting, but what you're saying is full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Well, I'm glad I'm glad I'm having such
It's not
success.
looking good. No.
Even mad people can understand after the fact, when the madness abates, that they have done something wrong.
But that's why I prefaced everything that I suggested, Madam Chief Justice, with the proposition that before and during, they knew exactly what they were doing. And that can only be judged by their own statements and conduct.
But you concede we learn little from what they said after.
Well, for my part, Mr. Bain, it's all Greek to me.
So the murderous plan is executed as conceived, and Macbeth announces, "I have done the deed. What I've done is treason." Their appreciation is acute. When he starts to have pangs of conscience, Lady Macbeth urges him not to ruminate about it, for it will drive us mad. This is after the fact. "The deeds must not be thought after these ways," she says, "so it will make us mad." Why? Because they're so wrong and they're fully appreciated as having been wrong. She instructs Macbeth to wash the blood from his hands because it bears filthy witness of the crime. A little water clears us of the deed. How easy it is. This is cunning, devious, and full appreciation. She goes further. I'll gild the faces of the grooms, the guards, with blood, for it must seem their guilt. The couple feigns surprise and grief. Woe, alas!
I'm sorry, Mr. Bain, but we have read the record.
Well, then, I'll conclude with this, Madam Chair. Because post-offense conduct is and can be so instructive, Macbeth, fearing Banquo as a potential witness, he saw the witches himself, he knows the prophecy, puts out a contract to kill his friend. Things are spiraling, as he says, things bad begun make themselves strong by ill. He's going to commit further wrongdoing to cover the first. He hires killers as well to kill the good MacDuffie, and there's a parable in this for all time and all political rulers. You see, the good MacDuffie is a threat to the evil ruler, and so the poor and virtuous man and his family are attacked by henchmen, the henchmen of the ruler, and yet in the end, the good MacDuffie triumphs. Thus ending the reign.
That
of the
seems to
murderous
remind me
ruler.
more of a different case than this. I just
Thank you, members of the court. Those are my
Thank
suggestions.
you.
Chief Justice, members of the court, I am going to deal with two basic and quite different arguments. And I had intended to respond to Mr. Bain's argument about psychosis, but I want to bring something else to the fore before I do that. So I will come at that second. You listen to him, and you know that on the facts of this case, the witches are real. If that's true, it's also quite clear that the witches have used their black arts to foreshadow and ordain the destinies of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth.
Oh, yes.
go on.
Thank you, thank you. Indeed, from the very beginning, we know that the witches have told him, and they know, that he will prevail in a horrific battle that is yet to happen. And they say, because they know, they'll meet him on the heath after the battle is done. So they know that he must win, too. So they harden him into a brutal, evil soldier. And what they do is to create a situation where the captain says, Macbeth kills another soldier by unseaming him from the nave to the chop.
And your defense counsel?
I am. Because the theory here is very important. What happens is
That's all you've got.
the witches themselves do something. They cast a spell. They make him brutal in battle. They know he will win. Now, the Salem witch trials teach us that you don't have to.
Have you read this book?
Yes, I have. They teach us that the witches don't have to be in the presence of the person that they bewitch.
Weren't the Salem witch trials 80 years after this?
No, I don't believe that's correct. We are kind of floating in the centuries, so I am going to say that we can have regard to their jurisprudential value. So, the witches know that Macbeth will be king. They tell him so. and they direct him to pursue his destiny. Now, what does that mean? Simply put, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are bewitched. And if one looks at what does it mean to bewitch someone, I want to put to you the ordinary dictionary meanings. It means that
Bothered and bewildered.
I'm sorry, Justice Brown. It goes beyond bothered and bewildered.
Oh, dear.
Let me take you there.
I'm quivering with anticipation.
It says very clearly in the Macmillan Dictionary, it means to have control over someone's behavior with magic. That's Macmillan. And the Merriam-Webster, to make someone say, think, or do as the witches direct. So it's my submission to you that this horrific manipulation of the human being is precisely why we've been executing witches over the century. They perpetuate evil, and they deprive a human person of autonomy and self-determination. So, it's my submission that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth were deprived of their ability to control their actions, make their own decisions, and be accountable to themselves as human beings. I was fascinated when I was preparing my submissions for the court to realize that even our criminal law today, in 2016, I'm sorry, Mr. Bain, does not prohibit, but rather recognizes the practice of witchcraft. In Section 365 of the Criminal Code, we only prohibit by law the fraudulent practice of witchcraft.
The pollsters will be relieved.
So what is prohibited is a property offense. It does not prohibit the occult. And I'm going to remind you, Chief Justice, that in 1987, the Supreme Court of Canada, in a case of Regina and LaBrosse, left open the question that if a witch honestly believed they could predict the future, that would be a defense to the practice of witchcraft. That remains the law in this country. So what is our criminal law premised on? And this is the most important principle. Our criminal law is premised on one thing, that the conduct of an accused must be voluntary. They must be able to direct their own conduct. So if a person is acting in an automatistic state, they will not be guilty of a crime, although in some cases, and we'll come to that, they may have a mental disorder that makes them insane. We have had jurisprudence where someone has killed in their sleep. The case of Parks is well known to many people. A person who drove 23 kilometers, killed a mother-in-law, badly injured a father-in-law, was asleep. He was a sleepwalker.
Slumbery agitation.
I'm sorry?
Slumbery agitation.
Well, that may be the case, but in that particular case of Parks, he was found not guilty because his actions were not within his own control. And we turn to another question, which is a very interesting question, about what is being bewitched? What do we do with that as a state? Is it a mental disorder that would take involuntary conduct into insanity? Or should my clients have been acquitted? Because to be bewitched is not a disease of the mind. It's not a mental disorder. Well, I'm going to touch briefly on one of the major issues this court will have to consider. A disease of the mind isn't just a medical term. It is actually a legal term, and there are many policy considerations that go into it. So when you say to yourself, should being bewitched be a mental disorder giving rise to an insanity defense or not criminally responsible defense, I think you want to say to yourself, what are the policy reasons I need to consider? But one of them is, when you are bewitched, is the behavior likely to reoccur? Well, as counsel in this case, I must confess, and I do believe, that Mr. Bain has one point. It is clear that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are bewitched. It is clear they kill Duncan in that state of involuntary action directed, ordained, and demanded by the witches. But it doesn't stop there. So their disorder or their bewitchedness continues to carry them forward, and they kill others. In those circumstances, I must concede that that policy ground would force the court to say, all right, it's a mental disorder. We're going to treat it as a disease of the mind because of the need to prevent future harm. So in the ordinary course, what would happen is indeed someone who is bewitched would have to be found not guilty by reason of insanity or not criminally responsible, and they would have to fall under the jurisdiction of the Board of Review, whose job it is to take care of people and help them get better. Assuming, of course, that the state of being bewitched will terminate at some time, and we do believe it does. So,
It's been going on all season, though.
Yes. Well, you will recall the witches
At least 3
appear
times.
and reappear, and they prepare this cauldron. They use human body parts in the cauldron to create their charm in a totally disgusting way. So, going on for all season, I submit to the court, isn't very long given the power of the charms that are set and the control they seek to have over human beings. So let me go back to, I'm sorry, Chief Justice, can you tell me how much more time do I have?
This is
All
so
right.
entertaining, I think you should bring it to a close rather quickly.
I would like to touch on one other thing, and it's the one that Mr. Bain focused on. Our criminal law has for decades understood and recognized that serious mental illness, referred to as a disease of the mind, exempts a person from criminal responsibility. That is what happened at the trial in this case. In our submissions, the evidence of the eminent Dr. Freud as filed in the report and the Honorable Dr. Ray establishes at the time of the killing of King Duncan, and that's what this charge is. He is charged with killing King Duncan. They suffered from a brief psychotic disorder, which is a recognized disease of the mind. And they were therefore not capable of knowing it was wrong when they did it. My friend stands before you in the Court of Appeal saying Dr. Ray's evidence, the Honorable Dr. Ray's evidence, really wasn't admissible. Well, with respect, that, just so I understand his position, if his position is you shouldn't give it much weight, that's one thing. But if his position is that it shouldn't be admissible because, in fact, it is deserving of no weight and he has no expertise, we certainly take the position it is before you. Crown Counsel didn't object at the trial and say this is inadmissible evidence. He let it in. This is a trial that happened before a judge alone. The jury is not going to be confounded by Dr. Ray's evidence. A judge will instruct themselves correctly as to the law. So Mr. Bain should not be permitted to stand in the Court of Appeal now and say this evidence is inadmissible.
He shouldn't stand on ceremony.
Correct. So let me touch on Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Both experts say that they suffered from a brief psychotic disorder marked by the presence of hallucinations, marked by the presence of delusions, and it's also marked by disorganized behavior and thought.
All of which happens after the murder.
Well, in my submission, it happens as part of the murder. Let me give you an example. Just before King Duncan is murdered, what do we have Macbeth doing? Standing there, and with respect, he's psychotic. He says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me? Is the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision sensible? To feeling as to sight, or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain?" That psychotic delusion occurs just before Duncan is murdered. And with respect, we have that, and then let's look at the behavior, the disorganized behavior. My friend says they had a plan, and it was all to go orderly. Well, indeed, look at what happens. Duncan dies, and Macbeth comes out of the chamber. And what does he do? He brings the weapons with him. He's not supposed to. He's supposed to have left them with the guards.
So he's stupid.
No, no, no. With the greatest of respect, that's disorganized behavior. That fits classically within a psychotic episode. So you have
So
him.
disorganized behavior is demonstrative of psychosis?
Yes, it is.
Oh dear.
Well, let me add this to that. It's demonstrative in a psychotic state as well as the delusions that the person has. So you start to put them all together. We have delusions, and then, of course, just after he kills Duncan, what does he say? "Methought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more." Macbeth does murder sleep. Still it cried, sleep no more, to all the house. Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cotter shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. That's, in my respectful submission, another example, because it's very unlikely there was a voice yelling that out. It's another hallucination he has. And all I'm really saying is you take the hallucinations and you take the delusions and you end up being of the view that he suffers from a psychosis. That psychosis is severe. He's unconnected to the moral dictates of his society, and he doesn't...
Sounds like you're describing a politician.
Well, you're quite right, Chief Justice, because that's what he is. He wants to be king. He wants to be, and I think it's important when we think of king, remember that he
It's
would
like
be...
Simba. It's going to be great to be king.
Well, a king is above all ordinary men. A king is as close as mankind can be
Something like the Chief Justice.
to God. Well, Chief Justice,
Careful,
that's a very
careful,
interesting
careful.
observation. You know, one of the interesting things about a democratic society and the development of the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary, and everyone has to live by the court's decisions, it's very much like the Chief Justice.
Nice, that was good.
Okay, now I actually think there are
We
other...
do have mandatory retirement.
Which is a very, very sad thing, Chief. We need you there. And lastly,
For
there's
another
one...
15 minutes.
Okay. I have one other hallucination I wanted to just remind you of. Banquo arrives when King Duncan is with the lords. Only Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo. I submit it is another powerful hallucination. And it's obvious it produces total disorganization in Macbeth. When that occasion happens, Macbeth looks at the table and says, "The table is full." And Lennox says, "No, there's a place reserved, sir." And Macbeth says, "Where?" He looks around and Lennox says, "Here, my lord." "What is it that moves, your highness?" And Macbeth, who is seeing Banquo in a chair, says, "Which of you has done this?" And the lords say, "What, my good lord?" Macbeth then says, "Thou canst not say I did it." And looking at Banquo, he says, "Never shake thy gory locks at me." And Ross says, "Gentlemen, rise. His highness is not well." So even the lords saw it. They saw the mental illness. They saw it, and it rendered Macbeth incapable of appreciating the nature and quality of his acts, or that they were wrong. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
May I be permitted a 1-minute reply, Chief
Absolutely.
Justice? The dagger actually is evidence of the opposite. Yes, on his way to commit what he identifies as withered murder, there is a momentary wrestling with conscience, a guilty conscience about what he's to perpetrate. And yes, in his mind, he's starting to picture what he's doing. And while he has that brief interlude, he quickly resolves it. This is a mere dagger of the mind, he says, the instrument I am to use. He is troubled about what he's about to do. He says, "There's no such thing as an imaginary dagger. I'm just having pangs of conscience." Rather than demonstrating lack of appreciation, he appreciates what he's about to do, and it troubles him. He says, "But I go on to commit withered murder." He hears the bell. The bell ringing is your death toll, your death knell, Duncan, he says. The same with the ghost. He dismisses the ghost and says, "That was merely self-abuse, pangs of conscience for what he has done and knows he has done." So I conclude with this. Double-double. This NCR is a bubble. Soon pricked by the evidence, it's nothing but trouble. So I implore you to cast it aside as mere legal rubble, or as hath spake Trudeau the elder, it's mere fuddle-duddle.
Well, normally in a case as difficult as this, the court would reserve judgment. However, given the imperatives of the occasion and the clarity of the arguments and evidence that we have been treated to, we are prepared at this time to give you our views. I call first on Justice Brown.
Thank you, Chief Justice, Justice Karakatsanis, Counsel, ladies and gentlemen. My reasons for judgment in this case, like the questioning of Dr. Ray, shall be brief. But they will also, as I'm sure you will agree, be received by all concerned with unbridled enthusiasm for their intellectual rigor, foolproof logic, and complete avoidance of rhyming couplets. Dealing with criminal cases is hard. It's hard work to see these cases from the perspectives of all concerned. So one has to approach these kinds of cases with empathy, which of course requires a large dollop of humility. And so that requires that you reach conclusions slowly and methodically, having carefully accounted for the nuances of the evidence and the viewpoints of others, and having contemplated the compelling arguments and insights that we've just heard from learned counsel. So let me just proceed to do that. These two are guilty. Should I go on? Okay. They're very guilty. And despite the speculations and the intrigue that this case provokes about the quest for power and the lengths one might go to attain it, Shakespeare wrote no mystery about the moral responsibility of this Caledonian Bonnie and Clyde. They're guilty. Now, I acknowledge that Macbeth laid out his career plans based on advice from some dubious characters, but I just think this is more indicative of his poor judgment, and we'll come to his poor judgment about choice of spouse as well, rather than any sort of he didn't marry well, right? I mean, yeah. But I don't think it tells us about depth of insanity. To portray the hags as some cunning strategist whose siren counsel lured Macbeth into a life of crime is not demonstrative of insanity. Double, okay, I acknowledge that someone who claims to have heard that and decides to entrust them with important decisions about his future may conceivably be crazy, but I think it's just as consistent with the conclusion that he was stupid. And maybe some other things. Maybe he had a rough upbringing. If he had grown up in a better neighborhood or run with better crowds, he could have stood a better chance at avoiding a life of crime. But this is all conjecture, ladies and gentlemen. All we know is that he slummed with these voodoo sisters who brewed potions that would likely qualify as Schedule II substances under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And we know he acted on their advice, so it's just as likely he was stupid or perhaps impaired or unfortunate, but that he listened to them is not demonstrative of insanity. And remember, he's not the only one who listened to them. Banquo asked for a prophecy. And I think that leads to another point. I think we're on very safe ground if we take judicial notice of the fact that witch whispering was all the rage in King James's Scotland. So much so that King James was active in persecuting witches out of fear for their role in, wait for it, encouraging treason and regicide. Macbeth listened to witches. Banquo listened to witches. Everyone did it. It was the done thing. It was like the Pokemon Go of Scotland. Another theory advanced was that the witches had turned him into an automaton who would have murdered murder if he were told to do so, but I don't see that in the evidence. I'm inclined to think that if he'd been, counseled to retire from the battlefield and, I don't know, take up gardening or run a royal commission or write a column in Zoomer, he would have done that. But alas, there was another advisor in the mix. And as I say, far be it from me to pass judgment on the relationship decisions of others, but he married badly. Was she crazy? Sure seemed like it. But not criminally responsible? No. I mean, don't forget that these hallucinations and desperate laundering and ultimately her suicide.
Do you have 31 pages?
No, almost done, man. Come after Duncan was killed. She was conniving. She was a two-bit low-life assassin associate. Now consider the truly delusional Macbeth at the banquet, where he chides Banquo's ghost. I agree. At this point, in technical Scots legal language, the neeps and taddies hae slipped awa from the plate. He's lost it, right? He's hallucinating so badly that Lady Macbeth has to dismiss the dinner guests. He's obviously in rough shape, but this comes well after he slaughtered the king. In short, if they were at any point insane, it was not at a time when such insanity would allow for a finding of not criminally responsible. To say that they're not criminally responsible is to confuse the effect of their actions with their cause. The two are guilty. I would allow the appeal and sentence them, were they not already dead, to be hung, drawn, and quartered.
Justice Karakatsanis.
Well, people of Stratford, to borrow words from the bard, forbear to judge, for we are sinners all, and yet you await our verdict with bated breath. Speak the speech, you cry, and thus must I render even-handed justice. While Lady Macbeth said none would call their power to account, in this court of law the truth will out. Mr. Bain claims that the Macbeths have committed an assassination most foul, and we must give these devils their due. But Miss Edward attests that they are bewitched of mind diseased, and thus justice must be seasoned by mercy. Alas, what's done is done. King Duncan hath breathed his last. But are the accused guilty of this crime, or spurred by vaulting ambition, did the Macbeth's journey that way madness lies? At the witching hour of the night, the stealthy Macbeth, swift as a shadow, struck and unstuck King Duncan from this mortal coil in one fell swoop. Mr. Bain says the Macbeths were not blind to the evil they did do. Macbeth urged the stars to hide their fires from his black and dark desires. His unnamed lady begged her husband to conceal his lean and hungry look beneath the appearance of an innocent flower. Clearly, the Macbeths did glean the moral import of this deed obscene, tortured by guilt, lamenting their blood-stained hands, longing to scour them clean. These are not signs of madness, but of method, words of those who know their acts are foul, not fair. And yet, Miss Edward does not say that the Macbeths have spotless reputations nor hearts of gold. She does not say they are filled with the milk of human kindness or as pure as the driven snow. But she asks, were their hangman's hand truly under their command? Macbeth was beset by a heat-oppressed brain, his mind full of scorpions, addled by an air-drawn dagger of the mind, visited by voices, visions, witches, ghosts, these unearthly beings. Ms. Edward doth protest to say that lust for power took the reason prisoner and trapped the Macbeths dans une grande folie à deux. To come full circle, the question is this: did ambition so corrupt the mind, so deprive it of rhyme and reason, as to snuff out free will's trembling flame? There's the rub. For if thriftless ambition excuses crime, as Dr. Ray does claim, as he does claim, then what chaos could in Parliament reign? These gifted lawyers have this audience enwrapped. Their urging runs trippingly on their tongues. But as an impartial judge, I must to mine own self be true and not be swayed by honey-tongued pleas. After 4 centuries, 'tis high time justice be done. As for the judgment, hear my thoughts on it in sonnet. Those, yes, iambic pentameter, I hope. Those of mind diseased, the law sees not fit to find in madness guilt, but must acquit. If seething brains o'ertake the reason's wit, condemn the fault, not the actors of it. Ambitious, but not bereft of reason, Macbeth, the nature of his act did know. His lady urged with fell purpose treason. They knew foul deed would a crown bestow. In saying they were not, knew their act not right, with method and guile snuffed out Duncan's flame. They steeped in blood the sleeping guards that night, in hopes that others would bear all blame. The crack of doom strikes, judgment here to end. The murderous Macbeths must be condemned.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. I find myself in a parlous place. First of all, I prepared no written reasons, wanting to keep my mind perfectly open to the submission. Secondly, I cannot, with the greatest respect, agree with the able submissions, conclusions, judgments, call it what you will, of my colleagues, despite the vaunting rhetoric, despite the sonnet-like cadences. I find myself impelled to conclude that the state, whatever it may be, has not discharged its burden of showing Lord and Lady Macbeth guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I must begin by acknowledging a concern I have about the evidentiary foundation on this case. If I'm not a Shakespearean scholar, but if I'm not mistaken, the only person Lord Macbeth ever confesses his crime to is Lady Macbeth. He denies it to everybody else. So how did we find out he did this? She must have said something to the court. But in 1600, wives were totally incompetent. That doesn't mean they weren't smart, but the legal term incompetence means they were not even allowed in the courtroom door and never to testify against their husbands. So something's gone wrong in this trial. I don't know what it is. But it does incline me to the view that we should take a very careful look at the evidence before we enter convictions. The second reason is the, how do I put this, paucity, downright shakiness of the expert evidence. We all know in this day and age you can't get a defense of not criminally responsible but for reason of insanity even in the door without several experts of great renown. And although we have renown here, what's bothering me is the expert part. Anyway, and I also sense a bit of bias here, don't you? I mean, we have a man who has been in waiting for 30 years for political power. A little taste back when, you know, in Ontario, but he's been chasing it ever since. And he's very sympathetic, or at least could be seen perhaps as sympathetic to the accused in this case. And as we know, experts have to be objective. They can't be hired guns. We wouldn't let them near a courtroom if they were a hired gun. Now, where does this leave us, given the paucity of the case? Well, we have no recourse but to go back to the bar. The court has to do something, and it has to accept the evidence it has. Shakespeare, I think, tells us all we need to know to conclude on the temporary insanity of Lord and Lady Macbeth at the time they did the act. First of all, we have the prequel, the witches. Nowadays, we call them voices. And when people come to court and say there were voices and they told me to do it, and they gave me the wrong idea, learned psychiatrists generally agree that that is a case for not guilty by reason of insanity. So we have the voices, we have the weird women, the wishes. But secondly, we have the state of mind of Macbeth at the moment before he commits the deed. He says, and it's been quoted before, clearly in a delusional state, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand?" To put it in the language of the Supreme Court of Canada in a judgment released only 2 days ago, "Is this a hockey mitt I see before me? Or is it a piece of plastic?" I rest my case. I, although in dissent, would have acquitted the Macbeths. Sadly, they will be sent once more to purgatory under the jurisdiction of the Ontario Review Board.
You don't need to prepare.
May I just say in conclusion how much Justice Karakatsanis, Justice Brown, and I have enjoyed being here. I want to thank you all for your interest and for coming here and being such an important part of this event.
Thank you. I just have some closing remarks. I'm going to say a few words and then invite Guy Pratt to make some proper closing remarks. But I want to thank all of the participants. It's incredible the amount of effort, enthusiasm, skill, humor, craft that they put to this. I mean, a sonnet and iambic pentameter. Wonderful. I'd like to thank those who have helped to make today's event possible. We have new partner today, the Advocate Society have helped to make today's event possible, Borden, Ladner, and Gervais, and also Kelly and Michael Meehan, who have given ongoing support to the Stratford Forum. Today's event, thank you. Today's event and the previous years, this appeal that we've been doing annually is one of our highest attended events, not just those of us that are in the room today, but this event is also streamed on the festival's website, and it's recorded by CBC Radio Ideas. And the person behind this event is Guy Pratt, and I'm very grateful to Guy and Mary for all of their support of today's event. Guy is a board member, he's an accomplished lawyer, and he's a budding impresario. He not only casts today's event, but he's come up with the idea and put it all together. So we're very, very grateful to Guy. So please join me in welcoming Guy to the stage.
Thank you and welcome back. The role that's imparted to me today is the easiest I could have, but it's also the most pleasant, and it's to thank all the people that have been involved in this. I'd like to start, obviously, with our court and our judges, Chief Justice McLachlin, Justice Karakatsanis, and Justice Brown. Stratford is the only place in Canada where the Supreme Court sits, outside of Ottawa. When this idea came to me 4 years ago, I had no idea how it would go. We expected maybe 150 people. And then actually I think we had over 600. And in the first year, the great good fortune is that the Chief Justice agreed to come. And as she showed tonight with her colleagues, the fact we have Supreme Court support is really the reason for this success. Now, you might wonder how we get the judges appointed to this court. There's no application process. It's totally obscure. We don't intend to make it transparent because we think we get the best judges that way. Wouldn't you agree? Now, this country is blessed in many, many things, in having great institutions. One is, of course, this extraordinary festival led by Anthony Cimolino, and it's the envy of the world. But another is, of course, the Supreme Court of Canada, led by Chief Justice McLachlin. And it's celebrated all over the world. And I hope that, if nothing else, this event reminded you of the importance of these institutions to the well-being of our country. Secondly, I'd like to echo Anita's words because it may look easy, but to prepare these appeals for our counsel, Marlis Edwards, Don Bain, and even for our so-called expert, Bob Ray, it actually, and even though it's a fictitious case, sort of, it takes a lot of hard work, and I've witnessed it, and I know what I'm talking about because I had the stupidity 2 years ago to put myself in this situation on the stage. And I was not only on the stage, I was the impresario. I selected the judges. I told them ultimately what their judgment should be, but I still lost. Go figure. I've been under the care of Dr. Ray ever since. So we're really privileged that they gave all their times and their senses of humor. Thank you very much for your participation. Thirdly, of course, there would have been no trial nor no appeal without Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And I'd like to acknowledge, I would like them to stand up if they might. Kristen. Ian Lake and Kristen Pellerin, who, for all of you here who have seen Macbeth thus far, maybe even last night, as many of us said, have given outstanding performances. I was hoping, actually, that you would get a fairer shake from the rule of law than you did last night, but obviously didn't quite work out. They are, of course, the best examples of the saying. I had this professor who said, 2 wrongs may not make a right, but 3 might. It's still... Thank you very much. Fourthly, I just want to say a word of personal thanks to Anthony Cimolino, Anita, and all the people at the Stratford Festival. It takes, not only for the lawyers and the judges, but the staff at Stratford, an immense amount of work to put this together, and I hope that you see your reward today by the attendances for the fourth year. Thank you so much. Finally, and of course most important, I'd like to thank all of you. As I said, when we started this, we didn't think we'd get a huge crowd. This year, I think we're close to 1,300 people attending this event. Maybe it's because we didn't increase the price of admission in the last 4 years. There's nothing actually forbidding donations, just by the way. But maybe it's because actually the courts and the stage have something profound in common. Maybe lawyers and playwrights go about it a bit differently. Lawyers look for facts and rules to achieve truth and justice. Playwrights, on the other hand, rely on the imagination and the purchase and the dominion of the heart, but also, I think you'll agree, also look for truth and ultimately justice. So there's a lot of in common between the two, and if you ever find yourself either in Ottawa or elsewhere in this country near a courtroom, you can actually drop in. It's accessible to everyone, and it's free, and that makes the experience all the more precious. So I hope you've enjoyed this appeal, one of the last in the Forum series. I think the last one is on October 23rd in the lobby of the Festival Theatre, when the great Margaret Atwood will be speaking about her relationship with the canon and read from her latest novel, Hagseed, which is based on Shakespeare's The Tempest. So I hope we'll see you there at that time, and meanwhile, enjoy the rest of your journey at Stratford and the great Stratford Festival. Thank you very much.